After last week's video about Tylenol and autism, I got to thinking, what are some other questions that people may be having right now about autism? Because there is a lot of misinformation that is coming out. So this week, we are talking about why does autism seem like it's skyrocketing? Is there really more autism today than there was 20 years ago, or are we just better at recognizing it? Hi, I'm Summer. I'm a leadership speaker and trainer who's also pursuing my PhD researching neurodivergence in the workplace. And this week, we're breaking down what's really behind the rise in autism diagnoses. Now, when people see rising numbers, the natural assumption is something must be causing the spike. That's what fueled the debates about vaccines, Tylenol, and all sorts of environmental factors. But the truth is a lot more complicated and far less scary. Autism as a diagnosis has evolved over time. In the 1980s, autism was considered rare and it was very narrowly defined. Then the DSM, the diagnostic manual used by clinicians, expanded the criteria. Terms like Asperger's syndrome and PDD-NOS were folded into autism spectrum disorder. That made the umbrella bigger, so more people qualified for a diagnosis than before. Now, 20 or 30 years ago, many people who would qualify as autistic today were never identified. Were considered part of the lost generation. We were seen as quirky, shy, difficult, or misdiagnosed with other conditions, such as bipolar. And here's another big factor: gender. For decades, autism research focused entirely on boys and men. Girls and women were overlooked because autism, it shows up differently. Instead of obvious behavioral differences, many autistic girls mask or camouflage these traits. They learn to imitate peers, they copy social scripts, and they push through the sensory overwhelm in ways that hide their struggles from teachers, doctors, and even parents. Now, as research has expanded to include girls and women, we're finally starting to recognize them. And what happens when you include 50% of the population? The numbers are going to go up. So this shift alone has contributed to rising numbers because thousands of us, women and girls who once would have slipped through the cracks, are now getting identified. There's also a practical side. In many school systems, a diagnosis unlocks access to resources, such as individualized education plans, therapies, or classroom support. That creates an incentive for families to seek evaluation, which naturally increases the number of formal diagnoses. And as we're talking about it and as we're learning about it, many of us are seeing and thinking, oh, wait, that kind of feels like me. And so adults are getting into the conversation. I have spoken to so many adults that they found out that they were autistic because their child was diagnosed. And so we're seeing that there's a lot of different pieces that are increasing the autism numbers that don't involve environmental numbers. Now, another piece of this is stigma. Stigma used to hold families back. Parents feared the label and adults didn't want to be identified, partially because the moms and parents were significantly to blame in a very big and brutal way. And also, if you got an autism diagnosis, it was a death sentence. They would lock you up in psych wards. And unless you had a family of means who could help support your neurodivergence, then doctors would tell the families, put them in psych wards, and they wouldn't be seen again. And so when we think about this, that stigma, while it still exists, it is shifting. The stigma has not disappeared, but it's no longer the barrier that it once was. More families are willing to pursue an evaluation, and more adults, even in their 30s, 40s, or beyond, are seeking late life diagnoses, myself included. So, are there more autistic people today than there were before? Most researchers believe the answer is no. The numbers are higher because our definition is broader, our awareness is sharper, and our tools are better. It's not an epidemic, it's visibility. Another way to think about this was being left-handed used to be considered a really bad thing. There was a lot of stigma associated with it. And so if as a child you were left-handed, then you would be forced to become right-handed. What happened after the stigma decreased? The number of individuals that were left-handed skyrocketed. Didn't mean that all of a sudden Tylenol was causing being left-handed. It simply meant that being left-handed was okay. We're seeing this happen with neurodivergence, including autism and ADHD as well. So what's the takeaway from this? Rising autism rates don't mean something new is causing autism. They mean society is finally seeing what has always been there. Boys, girls, men and women, binary individuals, and people across all walks of life who were autistic all along. Now, if this message lit a spark, stick around. Every week, I share insights from the stage, lessons in leadership, humanity, and the kind of change that actually sticks. And I promise I will always try and give you correct information. Whether you're leading a team or leading yourself, we're going to keep it real, relevant, and maybe just a touch rebellious. Until next time, don't forget, leadership starts with you, and you have got this. I'll see you next week.